To abort, or not to abort? That is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind, to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles, and, by having an abortion, end them. Some people consider the fetus as just a bunch of cells, and that it's okay to terminate that mass of cells, even up to the point of just moments prior to birth. Then there are those who consider the group of developing cells alive, and that fetus should be protected by law. Fortunately, we have the Vedic literature which has nicely described the movements of the living being. The Vedas talks of evolution in a different way from Darwin's established theory. Darwin speaks of evolution of the species through random mutation, which takes place over millions of years. The Vedas too speaks of evolution, but differs from Darwin in that it sees an evolution of the soul through the various species of life, and that this evolution through the species culminates in the human form. The Vedas explains the gradual development of the human body in the womb in the following way. In the first night, the sperm and ovum mix, and, on the fifth night, that mixture of sperm and ovum ferments into a bubble. On the 10th night, that bubble develops into a form that resembles a plum. Thereafter, it gradually turns into a lump of flesh. In the course of a month, the head is formed, and, at the end of 2 months, the hands, feet, and other limbs take shape. By the end of 3 months, the nails, fingers, toes, body hair, bones, and skin appear, as does the organ of generation, and the other apertures in the body, namely, the eyes, nostrils, ears, mouth, and anus. Within 4 months from the date of conception, the 7 essential ingredients of the body, namely chyle, blood, flesh, fat, bone, marrow, and semen, come into existence. At the end of 5 months, hunger and thirst make themselves felt, and, at the end of 6 months, the fetus, enclosed by the amnion, begins to move, on the right side of the abdomen. When the body of the child is completely formed, at the end of 6 months, the child, if he is male, begins to move on the right side, and, if female, she tries to move on the left side. Deriving its nutrition from the food and drink taken by the mother, the fetus grows and remains in that abominable residence of stool and urine, which is the breeding place of all kinds of worms. Bitten again and again, all over the body, by the hungry worms, in the abdomen itself, the tender child suffers. The Vedas states that the child is in such a painful condition that he becomes unconscious moment after moment. It is due to the child's consciousness being in an undeveloped stage that it can tolerate its predicament. It is recommended then that the mother not eat neither bitter or pungent foodstuffs, nor food which is too salty or too sour. What to speak of hitting the cigarettes and booze? Placed within the amnion and covered outside by the intestines, the child remains lying on one side of the abdomen, his head turned towards his belly, and his back and neck arched like a bow. The child thus remains just like a bird in a cage, without the freedom of movement. From the 7th month, the child is endowed with the development of consciousness, and the child is tossed downward by the airs that press the embryo during the weeks preceding delivery. Due to the forces of bodily air, and due to the entire uterine system becoming slackened before delivery, the child does not remain in the same place. The child is immersed in a pool of blood, stool, and urine within the abdomen of his mother. In this predicament, the embodied soul is scorched by the mother's gastric fire and is anxious to get out. On one side of where the child is floating is the heat of gastric fire, and on the other side is the urine, stool, blood, and discharges. After 7 months, the child, who has regained his consciousness, feels the horrible condition of his existence. Finally, after the full gestation period, the wind that helps parturition propels him forward, with his face turned downward, so that he may be born. Pushed downward suddenly by the wind, the child comes out with great trouble, head downward, breathless, and deprived of memory due to the severe agony of the birthing process. So, we have focused mainly on the essential biological timeline. The Vedas confirms that the child in the womb is in the earlier stages in a continuous state of moment by moment unconsciousness due to the severe pain experienced therein, and that in the later stages of pregnancy, specifically from 7 months, the soul has a more developed consciousness. The Vedas goes into great detail of the state of being of the soul in the precarious predicament of being confined in the womb, but we will save that for another day. Now, we will expand on the Vedas' position on the evolution of the soul through the species. The evolutionary process of the soul through different types of bodies can be compared to a fructifying flower. Just as there are different stages in the growth of a flower, the bud stage, the blooming stage, and the full-fledged grown-up stage of aroma and beauty. Similarly, there are 8,400,000 species of bodies in gradual evolution, and there is systematic progress from the lower species of life to the higher. The human form of life is supposed to be the highest because it offers consciousness suitable for getting out of the cycle of birth and death. The fortunate child in the womb of his mother realizes his superior position and is thereby distinguished from other bodies. Animals in bodies lower than that of the human being are conscious, but only to the extent that their physical happiness and distress are concerned. They see with instinct, but they cannot think of more than fulfilling the bodily necessities of life, namely, eating, sleeping, mating, and offending. However, in the human form of life, the consciousness is so developed that a man can evaluate his exceptional position and become self-realized. The Sanskrit word, Dhamma has been used to distinguish the human form from the animal species. It means that we have a body in which we can control the senses and the mind. The complication of materialistic life is due to an uncontrolled mind and uncontrolled senses. The distinction between an animal and a man is that the animal cannot control himself and has no sense of decency, whereas the human being has the sense of decency and can control himself. If this controlling power is not exhibited by the human being, then he is no better than an animal. By controlling the senses, or by the regulatory process of yoga, one can understand the position of his self, the supersoul, the world, and their interrelationships. Everything is possible through sense control. Without sense control, we are no better than animals. With this evolutionary process of the soul, through the various stages of consciousness in different bodies, we should not take it upon ourselves to check the progress of the soul through the slaughter of animals for food, and especially through abortion, when that soul has finally come to the human platform and is afforded the opportunity for spiritual success. Om Cat Sat